Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency meeting of February 27th. Can I have a roll call, please? Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Hutchinson.
Here.
Director Cody.
Here.
Director Lang.
Here.
Director Eastman.
Here.
Sheriff Perry. Here. And we have a couple of alternates that are going to be participating as directors in the voting capacity. And so Director Spencer Hill.
Here.
And Director O'Hara.
Here.
And just a couple of announcements. I know Director Largay has a conflict at the beginning of the meeting, but he is planning to join us in person later. And we have several noticed absences, including Director Martinez and Director Pollock, who are unable to attend. And Director Ankfer is not able to participate tonight because there was an error on the agenda posting and he is remote, so he's not able to join us remotely. So, thank you. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? No, hearing none. Do we have any oral communications for matters not on the agenda from anyone in the public here or anyone who's watching us remotely? Do we have anyone watching this remotely? We do. We have looks like 3 or 4 people joining remotely. Awesome. Not seeing any hands go up. Okay. So we'll just acknowledge some appointments from member agencies and start with the private well owner one. We lost Jeff Koopman. He resigned after many years of great service. And Cara Hutchinson, who's been the non-attending representative alternate, is stepped into the position. I'll be looking for a new alternate coming up later on the agenda. Alina, we know from been here before from San Lorenzo Valley. Wade Leishman from Scotts Valley was our backup, and now he has taken a forward position, and sitting in the back there is Bill Eckwall, who is now the alternate. And Alan Timms is going to be representing the city of Scotts Valley, but he's not here tonight. Donald, go ahead.
Sorry, we're noticing that Tim's was online. I don't know if he was properly noticed and can join the meeting as a participant, voting member. Or maybe he's catching up.
Yes, I did check his email. Actually, if he was not noticed as a remote attendee, he cannot, but I'm gonna allow him to talk for just a moment, just to make sure we're not misunderstanding something. Good.
Hey guys, thank you. I did get the agenda, but I just stepped off a plane, so I'm en route and I probably won't get there in person. But I am here and I am listening in, and obviously I appreciate that I can't be a voting member because I didn't notice it, but I am here anyway. So thank you, and yeah, thanks for having me on board.
All right, thank you, Alan. And alternate director Donald Lim, the city of Scotts Valley, who is not attending. Okay, consent agenda. You have the approval of minutes and annual reimbursement disclosure. Anyone want to pull anything from that? And do I hear a motion?
I move. So for fear without Ankfer here to nitpick the minutes that I didn't wrong.
I might have to note so you guys don't get it. Yeah, we do have Anchor notes available, but nothing on the notes.
I've seen Doug's notes, they're always great.
Second.
Okay, so that is Cassidy and Koenig. And all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Is that any opposed? Hearing none opposed, we'll carry it. And then I will move down to presentations, groundwater sustainability program update. Okay, this is gonna be Rob, so give me just a moment and I'll pull up his presentation, share my screen. Say again, yeah. Second, share the screen for folks online.
Stand if that's okay with you all. So for anybody that did download this presentation before about 2 o'clock today, it is posted online. If you did, don't use that one. It's been fully replaced. So both presentations I'm giving you this evening have been posted. They are available on the website if you'd like to download them. Go ahead, Tim. So if you'll indulge me, we have a few new board members tonight. Welcome. I do want to give a couple of minutes of background just to set the stage so we can kind of have the context. We're talking about all this monitoring and the annual reporting. So first of all, we are charged with implementing this groundwater sustainability plan and some of the nuts and bolts. What does it require? Required that we developed sustainable management criteria for the basin, are called SMC. And those are basically defined as minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And here on the right-hand side is a hydrograph. Shows an example of how we look at that. So minimum threshold says we don't want things getting any worse than that. That's our bottom, that's our floor. Measurable objective is more aspirational. It's where we want to be in the future. Doesn't necessarily mean that you would be out of compliance 20 years down the road if you aren't meeting your measurable objectives. You are judged by violation of these minimum thresholds. And then using those SMC, you define what undesirable results are. So all of that's in the groundwater sustainability plan. Those will be, we'll be moving forward to the future, evaluating are we experiencing undesirable results. As part of that, you have to identify a monitoring network that is capable of monitoring for all of those things that you say you're going to do. You also have to identify projects and management actions that are going to ensure that you arrive at sustainability at 20 years. So for that's 2042 for us. And so there will be times where we could go below minimum thresholds, but they're really going to judge us at 2042. We could stay above those until 2040 and then things go wrong. Well, then we're in trouble, right? So that's the time horizon that we're on. Go ahead, Tim. So get a little bit more background for those of you who haven't been working in the basin. This is a basic cross section. We have 4 primary units that we draw water from. That is the Santa Margarita, that's the yellow formation on top. It's a nice sandstone, takes plenty of water. Unfortunately, it's generally not very thick in the basin, so there's not a lot of volume in it. Below that, we have this greenish color, that's the Monterey Formation. Pretty much a clay, siltstone, not very good. If you have a domestic well around here, it's enough to give you some water, but not good for high capacity wells for public water supply. Below that is the Lompico sandstone shown in the light blue, and further below that is the Butano sandstone. So they're in the basin, but they tend to be quite deep. So unless you're a large public supply well, you generally can't afford to drill that deep to get your water supply. So most of the domestic wells are in the Monterey Formation, and we have a lot of public supply wells in the Lompico and Butano. Here's a map showing all of the monitoring that we do in the basin. And so we have to monitor surface water sites, we have to monitor streams, we have to monitor groundwater levels in a subset of dedicated monitoring wells, but we also do a lot of monitoring out of our production wells as well. So we look at water levels, water quality in those. So I want to give you a couple of updates on some of the monitoring that we performed in 2024 going into this year. So I just mentioned we have dedicated monitoring wells. So Santa Margarita received a grant from the Department of Water Resources several years ago. And with that, we constructed 7 monitoring wells. You'll see a number 8 on there. Problem is we weren't able to construct number 1. It's the deepest well. We're still trying to work on that. So they're sequentially, we have up to 8 there, but we have 7 monitoring wells that we constructed. They are generally, all of these are shallow. And so the intent is to look at areas near surface water bodies so we can understand what the relationship between streams and groundwater is in the basin. And they also tend to be in areas where there's a lot of domestic wells because we don't have a lot of information there. So that was our goal with some of these. We have now collected data for a full year out of these wells, and here's just a couple of examples. The land trust, we have property, they have property that they allow us to drill a monitoring well on at the old Geyer Quarry. And we have a shallow well that was completed in that Monterey formation. We did that because, again, there are some domestic wells nearby. We wanted to see what water levels looked like. A little over a quarter mile away, near Nelson Road, we have another shallow monitoring well, but it's completed in the Santa Margarita sandstone. And so this year kind of gives us an idea of the differences, which we've always suspected between those two formations. So we can see we had a nice wet 2023. And what we see in the well in the Monterey formation in Geyer Quarry, levels are flat for a few months. We don't see a lot of influence from groundwater extraction in that, so that's good. And then eventually we get rain throughout the December, January, and water levels start to increase on this kind of even slope up through February. And then they just sort of gradually decrease. So their water's coming in, Santa Margarita sandstone is around that old quarry, you probably recognize it. Comes in, it flows, it hits the Monterey, it starts to slowly back up, and then it just dissipates because the rains stop through time, and it's back down in the fall, back to those normal levels. So that gives good indication, again, of how we expected that to behave. Then we have the one in the Santa Margarita that's right on the creek. And what we see is, I'll call this more flashy for anybody that's in hydrology, right? You get these rain events and boom, water levels just jump right up. But we know the Santa Margarita is very transmissive. It doesn't hold water for very long. And you can see these pretty quick drops just over periods of days. And so they respond to rain events. And then they go back down. It's essentially just going around the channel and it's going into the bank storage and it's flowing right back out. So again, these are behaving ways that we expected them to. Good data coming out of them. Eventually, we'll be establishing sustainable management criteria for these wells. So when we go through periodic evaluations, starting over the next couple of years, we will be establishing those minimum thresholds, measurable objectives for those locations. So in addition to the groundwater monitoring, we have to do surface water monitoring as well. And so our network, historically, over the last several years, has consisted of these green locations, the San Lorenzo River upstream of Love Creek, Newell Creek, just upstream of San Lorenzo River.
I'm trying to pull that down so the legend
Yeah.
is visible there, but it's sensitive.
Being sensitive. I can point that out, yeah. So all the green locations we had historically monitored. This year, we added, or in 2024, we added a location that is on Carbonera Creek, just a couple of blocks down here. That was identified as something we needed more information on. But at the green and the yellow, for this dry season, starting in May, ending around November, we put on data loggers and we're collecting data every 15 minutes. So we have a very extensive record for that period. The blue locations in 2024, we decided we wanted a little better idea of what's happening along these segments of the stream, right? So we know during the dry season, the groundwater basin actually feeds the creeks, but we don't know to what extent. So what we did was, as a fairly cost-effective way of doing this, when our consultant CBEC went out and download the data once a month, they would also go up to these locations and collect a spot measurement. So we would have, at least for that month time step, we would have an idea of what the flow was. And so we could see how that is changing through time. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So I kept those dots here on Zayante Creek. That happens all the time with those, doesn't it? We have Zayante up near Lompico. We have Zayante near Quail Hollow Road. And then we have Zayante just above the confluence. And so I color coded those so that you can see upstream the blue bar, and we collected these every month. I'm going to start with the June, the second set of data. This is what we expected to see, okay? Upstream, we have a flow of 5.2 cubic feet per second. At the Quail Hollow location, we have a flow of 5.99 cubic feet per second. And at the confluence, we have 7. So that tells us that between those segments, we are picking up, groundwater is feeding into the system. So we can see that for most months, that is consistent. We have no idea what was happening in May here. May really surprised us, and we are pretty certain about these measurements because this orange one, there's actually a weir at Quail Road. That's a good measurement for a field spot measurement. We don't know why this orange dot should have been up, or lot bar should have been up between the blue and the gray. So we don't know if that's a function of, we don't see any diversions that are authorized. So we're not positive that there was an unauthorized diversion of surface water at that point. We're also not quite positive if that wasn't a period where what we'll be doing is really looking through this data over the next couple of years and monitor again this year. We don't know that it couldn't have been related to some groundwater wells that were pumping pretty heavily at that point in time, right? So they could have been locally pulling water out of the river at that time. Very common. So interesting data. We're going to do it again this year and continue to try to understand this part of the system. So moving into 2025, this is the table. I don't know why I keep it, but I just do. Essentially, this is how we plan for our year. We need to know if we're going to replace equipment, right? So we have these data loggers and we actually just track them based on their battery life. I've highlighted in red a unit that we're pretty certain is going to fail this year. And what we do is we have a backup gauge located at the same location just in the event that it does. So this is my way of telling you, we're in pretty good shape this year. We're prepping just a little bit just in case. We don't want to lose data in that month between the consultant visiting it. So we will go back out and we're going to review that 2024 data that we collected, decide if we want any minor adjustments to any of that monitoring. We're going to visit the sites in early April, determine that any storm damage, potentially any repairs that need to happen, but we didn't really see a lot of that this year. Don't expect a lot, and then we'll commence the monitoring in May. A couple of other items that I wanted to update you on are related to Department of Water Resources. So Sierra has reported to you that we have been participating with this small GSA coalition. It's about 11 agencies now. It's been trying to let the state know that this is quite a financial burden on us to comply with SMGWA. So we've been working with that group. Sierra got me involved in that and then got me volunteered onto a committee on compliance costs. But it's a really good committee. It has Red Harmon, formerly the general manager of Scotts Valley and now involved with the Salinas Basins, and Marcus Trotta with Sonoma County, who has a tremendous amount of high credibility with the state. So it's this committee of three. We have been exploring ways to try to bring our costs down over the long term. We asked for a meeting with the state and they gave us one. They were actually very receptive. We met with them on January 21st. And they're really kind of three areas that we are exploring. One of those is a near-term focus on reducing costs. So we gave them some examples of redundancies that exist and trying to find some ways to manage those. Here's just one example, right? We take data, we upload it into a data management system. We then download that data, create these hydrographs, put them into a report, which ends up being about 70 pages of a document. Then we upload that data in a separate file that the state format that you have to use to the state. And then guess what they do with it? They upload it into a database and then they create hydrographs with the SMC. And I've shown you this. It's actually kind of a neat site. I've linked it to our own website. That's pretty inefficient, right? So we asked them, couldn't we just upload data to your site? You would create these sort of for us. And they actually got excited. They said, hey, it's one of the things we've been thinking about doing. And they gave me a little beta test so I could go on and specify a time period and download all of the hydrographs for our basin. And then potentially take them and toss them into a PDF. I said, that'd be great. But what if we just didn't have to publish them at all because they're all available online and the public can get on and look at that in one area. So these are the types of things that we're exploring on ways that we cut costs. As I said, they are very receptive and they were pretty sensitive to the issues that we have. So we're looking to leverage not just the redundancies, but also using some of their online tools to start to gradually replace through time the need for this written narrative document, right? If you aren't violating any of your SMC, then what do you have to talk about? right? So I think, try to build this case. So we're hoping that we can have some progress with that. And that involves what was called substantial compliance, right? We've talked about the cost of preparing the contour maps that we have to prepare for this report. And a lot of them are just covered the tiny little areas because we have such little data. And so we talk about, couldn't we provide a table to you that shows the differences from this year to last year? And if there's something major that was negative, I would just talk about that, right? So we're exploring areas. Again, they were very open to meeting and actually continuing these meetings. They seem to appreciate having a dialogue with us as a group. So I think it's pretty valuable. And I think we'll get some results out of that.
That's great.
And lastly, I've mentioned a few times, most of you know that we also work for the Mid-County Groundwater Agency. So we leverage as much as we can the activities over there, to try to benefit the Santa Margarita. So the MGA is a critically overdrafted basin, so they're 2 years ahead of the Santa Margarita. So every time that they have to do something, we have an opportunity to learn from it. They just completed their periodic evaluation, and it was approved by their board December 12th. It was submitted to DWR on January 30th. They did opt to not amend their groundwater sustainability plan. So we'll be talking about that over the next year ourselves locally. I think that there could be some reasons for seeking to amend the groundwater sustainability plan to try to relieve ourselves of some of the, particularly the monitoring burdens that we put on ourselves. So they chose to not do that. Very different reasons, you know, seawater intrusion down there in particular is a big issue still. So again, it helped inform, and I think we have a much better idea of what the level of effort is going to be for us. And we'll talk about some of that with the budget. We also have long-term funding options that MGA. So this board did approve a budget item to begin exploring potential for fees to fund the organization long-term. And we chose to kind of sit and wait. And again, I think learn from what MGA is going through. So MGA does have grant funding, so they have naturally just trying to move forward a lot more quickly than we would. It does expire at the end of the year, so they're being pretty aggressive this year. They have a budget for $50,000. They went through an RFQ. We assisted with that. Secured a group called SCI Consulting that specializes in local agency fees. And they're essentially identifying interested parties that we need to work with. Go through an education process, an evaluation process. What are the characteristics of this basin? This is not the San Joaquin Valley where you have large farming operations that have resources to assist with paying for these kinds of things. And then based ultimately on that interaction, there's a public workshop that's actually scheduled March 17th. So for anybody who's not out with their corned beef and cabbage has an interest, you can come down and watch what happens there. But we are inviting all domestic users in the Mid-County Basin area to a workshop to begin discussing these fees. So it'll be our first significant interaction with the public. Again, I think a lot that we'll be able to learn from that. I think that's all that
That's serious.
Yeah, any questions on the sustainability program update?
I guess maybe.
Yeah.
You said that during the dry season, these monitors pick up data every 15 minutes.
Yes.
Why so, not, that I'm against it,
Yeah.
but why so frequently? Because it would seem like, how much would it change during 15 minutes?
Yeah, it could probably be a few hours would be more appropriate, but it's sort of, in some ways it's because we can.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, we oftentimes actually find ourselves processing that data to come up with some averages, right? But that way we know that we won't miss anything that is potentially significant. So,
Okay.
Yeah, but longer term, if we keep monitoring well in there, I would typically go back to a couple of times a day, right? Because there are some diurnal exchanges, but that's about it.
But assume a longer time between readings would be your batteries are gonna last longer,
It can
right?
last
So your
longer.
cost of replacing the things would go down if you
Right.
longer reading time.
Right, and we find that they last several years to begin with, and at that point, the instrument itself may be failing before the battery even runs out at that point.
Got it.
Does anyone from the public have a question? No, in the room, I'm gonna just double check online to see if there's any hands going up. Let's see. See one hand up, which is mine. So no, I'm not seeing any hands from the folks joining us online. Okay. Well,
Actually,
yeah, go ahead. Go
it's,
ahead,
it
Brian.
has to do more with it was in the report, but I think it's related, but I was a little curious about the lids, the low impact, recharging.
Right.
I'm curious, how do those work? I understand it's sort of permeable areas where water can recharge.
Yeah.
And it's the transit center, the library, and someone correct me, what's that?
It's transit center, it's the library, there are several more, there's many of them throughout Scotts Valley.
Okay,
Private, some private and some public, it was the transit center and the library, the only ones that were.
Woodside,
Woodside, but that's not public,
no, but we monitor, those are the three that we monitor.
but we monitor.
and do those go into recycled water or do they just? go
Goes back into the ground, they get stored underground, sometimes in various kinds of vessels. But that allow perking back into the ground, so you can store a large amount of water as it rains. And then it gets, it just recharges into the ground. We have how many acre feet a year?
20,
Yeah,
20,
20,
20 to 30, yeah.
and an acre
Yeah,
foot is
it is.
325,000 gallons.
You are pretty limited to stormwater in that case. You can't put
Right.
recycled
No.
water. into that. Yeah, and you have to show that there's actually a separation between where you're putting it in and where the water table is, so that the aquifer materials sort of naturally filter out any constituents of concern, as we call them. You use what's called a dry well. It's a fairly wide diameter well, and you allow runoff to accumulate to a certain area, goes down, and it just percolates into the subsurface.
Okay, constituents of concern is my next funk band.
And I just wanna say, Sierra, you were really kind of one of the forefront of getting this, small group, small basin team together to go lobby the state,
Yes.
small voices shaking loud noises.
It's nice that it seems to be it seems to be bearing fruit.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then I was given a nice, easy thing to read here with new appointments, and I left out Ray. I didn't specifically call you out, and Supervisor Martinez. Monica Martinez sent me a very nice email today saying she wasn't gonna be here. Looking forward to working in the future, and that Ray was gonna be here, and I failed to acknowledge both of them. And I did not acknowledge Susie O'Hare, who's gonna be the new alternate for the city. Yes, I know, but I didn't say,
Yeah, thank you,
You know.
thank you.
anyway. You give me too much easy information, and I apologize. So then I guess you're still up then. for the next-
Rolling right into the
Okay,
next
roll.
presentation, right?
I'm gonna share my screen again. Rob, give me just a second.
So we'll just give you some highlights of the annual report before we take an action.
Okay.
So one of the things that we have to do as part of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, is an annual report to show progress. We worked with an ad hoc committee in 2023. Appreciate the help from Director Perry, Director Koopman, at the time, Director Mayhood.
Inkfer.
Director Inkfer and
Director Stiles.
Stiles, thank you. Helped to craft this report as you see it today. Of course, we followed pretty closely state guidelines that were released in October 2023 to arrive at this. So go ahead. So again, just some highlights for the hydrology for the year. On your left is precipitation as we measure at 2 stations. On the top is at Boulder Creek, and down at the bottom is El Pueblo here in Scotts Valley. And so what we do there is the long term is plotted up in the reddish colors. I'm having real trouble with my eyesight here tonight. And then the grayish colors are what we saw in 2024. And so you can see on a monthly basis versus the cumulative basis, which is the line that's moving through there. You can see that we Started off the year quite a bit behind. And we started to catch up in the February, March timeframe. So you can see those monthly events. Eventually what we got was somewhere around 85 to 90% of average precipitation, which is interesting because in the Mid-County Basin with their monitoring, they were above average. So even locally, you can get pretty significant differences. So even though we were below in precipitation, this is where you get that mixed bag. We actually had above average runoff in the Santa Rosa River. And that continued. Obviously, February had a lot to do with it. So we had some pretty significant events that were over short durations. Again, that whole, what might we expect in some future climate with these short duration, high intensity events? A lot of runoff, right? So we're not getting recharge out of something like that. But you can see even after that really wet February, we still had every month was just a little bit more flow in the San Lorenzo than we experience a long-term average, despite drier than average precipitation. So you go back to 2023, we had so much water and a lot of it made it into the basin. I think part of what we're seeing there is just a continued release out of the basin. And so you still have these higher than average flows in San Lorenzo River. So pretty interesting year as we transition from that super wet 2023. So some of the water use that we saw in 2024, the basin had a total water use of 3,725 acre feet. On the left-hand side is a graphic that we create for this report. In the back is the light gray line at the top. That's actually the city of Santa Cruz, their diversion down Page Street. So it's not taken from the basin, but we document all of the use that's coming out of the watershed, overall watershed. So the use within the basin is shown down in the lower colors. We can see that 2024 was very similar to 2023 in terms of total water use. In terms of groundwater use, it was 2,346 acre feet. That is the lowest that we have measured since our record keeping started in October 1984. So this 40-year period, that is the lowest by just a few acre feet from the previous year amount of groundwater use. We did use 1,200 acre feet of surface water compared to a long-term average of 871. So really interesting. You see there are sort of two things happening here. Number one, groundwater use is down from its long-term average. Its long-term average is 3,600 acre feet. The last 20 years in this particular area, water efficiency has been phenomenal, right? So groundwater use is down by over 50%. We do see surface water use was up from its average, but it's what we want to see actually, right? It was a relatively normal year. And in this year's document in the report, San Lorenzo Valley Water District has been using more surface water than they have been using in the past. A lot of that's still related to the 2020 CZU fires, right? So they've been using excess surface water where they, in portions of their system that they don't have a long-term ability to do. And that's around its place of use of its water rights. But the higher surface water use is actually a good thing, and we're seeing benefits in the basin from that. So in terms of change in groundwater and storage, this is a number we're required to calculate. We use a model to do it, and we have to report that to the state. And so what this shows is on any given year, the bars indicate if they are above this middle line. If they're above it, we gained groundwater and storage. We can see 2023, tremendous, over 10,000, roughly 10,000 acre feet of positive storage. Best year that we have at least calculated by a model, right? So you have to trust it, but at least if it's wrong, it's consistently wrong every year. So it indicates we had a really good year compared to any of the others. If it's below the line, then we lost storage. And so again, it was just sort of an interesting year. You can barely see the little gray bar there. It's just slightly below. We lost 260 acre feet total storage. And when we can ask the model, so where do we think that came from? Because these different geologic units are represented by different layers in the model. So we can pull that information out. And we can see that the largest loss actually came from the Santa Margarita Formation, which again makes sense. It's right near the rivers. When the rivers come into this basin and we're sort of the low spot as it's flowing out, a lot of Santa Margarita. So it's being lost, and we can see that in the figures as well. That's where the greatest change in storage, the loss is occurring. Other than that, it was a pretty decent year. I mean, in terms of not a whole lot happening. Couple of quick statistics here, though. You know, if you go back to 1985 and that old groundwater use, the average annual change in storage is a minus 850 acre feet, right? So we were, that long-term average, we were pumping 360 or 3,600 or so acre feet. That was quite a bit too much, right? If you look at the last 20 years, I call that sort of 2001, it's sort of peak water use, and that's quite literal. I think it's the highest demand that we had on groundwater, but you can see that trending down over the last little over 20 years. Since that time, average change in storage has come down to about 300 acre feet, a loss of about 300 acre feet. So we're getting really close. But I want you to kind of keep that number in mind, right? That's what speaks to what else do we do? Because water efficiency, we've done a lot there. I don't know how much more that we could possibly do. So, Tim. So it starts to speak of things that we need to do operationally. Okay, so in the report, we talk about the projects and management actions that are required in groundwater sustainability plan. There are actually three groups. Group one are things that we have been doing and are continuing to do. Group two, these are new projects, primarily around operations. And group three, those are backup projects. That's what if these things fail. So we're not really going to be talking about those for, well, hopefully forever, but certainly somewhere well down the road. But the report does point out, when you look at water efficiency, so Scotts Valley Water District, San Lorenzo Valley Water District are still running water efficiency programs. And you can see though that the cumulative benefit of these is somewhere around an acre foot a year, because there's just not much more you can do. So I think we've run that course. We do have the low impact development. We are achieving some recharge, again, 28 acre feet. Again, compared to 2,300 acre feet of usage over the year. So it's, you know, you're getting a % or two benefit from that. Scotts Valley Water District, obviously the recycled water program, 150 acre feet. So that's been very helpful. That's been running for 2 decades as well, right? And there's been a lot of water that has gone into the basin. I want to say it's somewhere in the 3,000 acre foot range or so. It's more than a year's of groundwater supply. And then finally, SLV, San Lorenzo Valley Water District, does have an active conjunctive use program. They do have some ability to move water around their system, and they achieve, or it's an estimate. And what we do is we say, what's your typical behavior? How much groundwater do you used to use? How much did you offset that groundwater use? And so we can kind of come up with an estimate of how much we think that they did in terms of conjunctive use. It's just shifting, right? Conjunctive use is shifting if you have access to both surface water and groundwater, shifting those supplies to match the hydrologic conditions, right? So when it's wet, you want to preferentially use surface water, so you're achieving some groundwater recharge naturally. When it's dry, you go back to that groundwater, right? Group two then, the two main projects that are going on are SOB is exploring conjunctive use. They are working on engineering feasibility study that they're expecting later this year to look at where can they expand their place of use for their surface water supply that are existing, and also can they exercise in the 313 acre foot allocation that they have on Loch Lomond Reservoir. So combination of those surface water sources, looking at the feasibility of those, and then ultimately developing those into a conjunctive use program, which again, I think some of these volumes are what's going to help us close that 300 acre foot gap that we were talking about, right? With that storage that's been lost on an average annual basis. And Scotts Valley Water District and City of Santa Cruz, nice article in the Lookout today, or which one was it? Santa Cruz Local, thank you. On the project and other projects by the city. But the intertime, which serves as an emergency supply, but also creates opportunities for additional conjunctive use by linking up systems. We'd love to see that. Expecting completion. I have in the report 2020, end of 2025. I read in the paper today, early 2026. So we'll make sure that we resolve that date before we go final with this annual report. So next. So for the SMC, we have to have sustainable management criteria for 4 different indicators. There are 6 in Sigma. One of those is seawater intrusion, not an issue here. The other is subsidence. Again, unfortunately, not an issue here. So We pay attention to chronic lowering of groundwater levels. What this graph shows you is 5 years worth of data. I think what you want to do here is sort of look at that and see the evolving color. Okay, so green means you're actually meeting your measurable objective. Okay, that's not the one you even have to meet. That's your aspirational. But more green, super good. Yellow indicates that you are good with minimum threshold, and we have some interim milestones. Every 5 years, we have to have a milestone that we're trying to meet. That indicates we've met that. Orange indicates that we are again above the minimum threshold, but we haven't quite met that 2027 milestone. We're not even at 2027 yet, so I'm not terribly worried about that. And finally, red, which you should note is not on here, is a minimum threshold exceedance, right? So we're in really good shape. And what you can see through time here, as more colors are going towards away even from that orange color and into the yellow and into the green. So we're seeing progress every year. Number 2 is reduction in storage. So for the 4 formations that we talked about earlier, we have set targets on how much groundwater we can extract from those. And so we have a minimum threshold, don't go below it, or I should say above it in this case, right? Don't pump more than is in that number. But we'd like to get to these measurable objectives. Again, we can see that in 3 of the 4, we are actually meeting our measurable objectives already. And it's the Lompico formation, which, by the way, is that formation that is sort of the heart of discussions that with these conjunctive use programs, that's the formation that really is being targeted. And so I think that one's really gonna yield some good results there. But even at that, again, we are still above the minimum threshold by a little bit. So. Groundwater quality degradation. So we had to identify constituents of concern for the basin and establish sustainable management criteria for those. The criteria that they used were drinking water standards for most of these. I will say that they're not all primary. So a primary drinking water standard is one that's associated with a health concern. A secondary drinking water standard is associated with an aesthetic concern. You don't want to see your fixtures getting stained and, you know, get deposits and such, right? So iron and manganese have a secondary standard, it's not a health-based concern. So you can see in this table that we are not meeting the water quality standards, the secondary water quality standards for those. So they kind of stand out as a concern. However, they don't meet our definition of an undesirable result. So it's one of those little quirks of our groundwater sustainability plan, the way that we chose to approach it, that we continue to identify that we have a minimum threshold exceedance, but we say, yeah, it's not a problem. So as we look at the periodic evaluation, we might want to think about potential ways to clean that up because it's kind of unusual. Everywhere else, we're actually in pretty good shape. No other minimum threshold exceedances, and generally speaking, non-detects, that's the ND, or we are meeting our measurable objective. Surface water depletion. So this is a subcategory of groundwater elevations. So this is groundwater elevations near streams, rivers, creeks. And what you're trying to do is show that the groundwater is not being pulled down so much that it's actually depleting the surface water, right? So it's going and going into the basin that could potentially have environmental habitat issues and riparian corridor as well. So, you know, both critters and plant life. So that would be a concern. We only have 2 current locations. They're in good shape, no exceedances. The blue dots, that's the monitoring wells we talked about earlier. These are ones that we would anticipate over the next couple of years as we get more data, establishing sustainable management criteria for those. So key takeaways from the report. Water year 2024 resulted in progress for most of the sustainability indicators in the basin. We're seeing progress on the implementation of projects, particularly the 2 that are of most importance. And it's really, they're both around conjunctive use, which is, we think, what we need to close that last remaining gap to ensure that the basin is sustainable in 2042. That's all we have. So an action on the.
There is, we have an action, pull that up just for the reference. there is the recommended action.
Okay, do we have any questions from the board? No, anything from the public?
Not seeing any hands in the room, but let me see if there are any hands going up online. Give folks a second, I'm not seeing any hands go up online either.
Okay, all right, then, anyone needing? You made a motion
I will
To
move that
accept.
we accept the,
draft,
groundwater sustainability plan annual report for water year 2024 and authorize submittal.
okay, is there a second? Okay, Susan, second. All right. O'Hare and Cassidy. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, hearing no opposed, it's unanimous. That's great. I've got that right here. Excellent. Okay, preliminary budget.
Okay, I have this one, I'm gonna do a, look at the preliminary budget for the next fiscal year and also, run through the table that shows where we are at for the current year. And so I'm gonna pull up the table here and try to blow this up a little bit, and then I'm gonna share my screen for the folks online. We do have a slightly new format in how this budget is being presented, so I wanna take a minute and just, orient everybody to it. For those of you who have the packet and it's easier to view on there, if it is, it's page 167. And so what you're seeing on the far left column is the actuals from fiscal year 2024 for reference on there. So you're gonna see the beginning reserves up at the top. As you are aware, we have created some designated reserve funds. And so you'll see the 5-year periodic evaluation and the funding mechanisms evaluation, which is proposed, and I'll get to that when I talk about the revised budget for the current year. We have our operating revenue, noteworthy that in fiscal year 2024, that was the last year that we were receiving funds from the DWR Sustainable Groundwater Management Program grant, so that's the $184,000 that you're seeing there. We have operating expenses that are presented by the major categories. The one that you might have noticed, and I'll come back to this within the budget narrative in the packet, is technical services. That's the bulk of the expenses under that professional contract services. So we do have a breakout that gives a little more detail on the specific line items there that I'm gonna go through. And then we have, again, for that first column, fiscal year 2024, you're seeing the last of the funds related to capital improvements in the monitoring network. And then the ending reserves. So the first or the next column over there shows the approved budget for this year. You can see we had member agency contributions totaling $359,000. We had operating expenses at $490,000. And as you recall, the board opted to, there was two things that relate to this. One was the creation of a general reserve policy, which set our target general reserves at 20% of annual operating revenue. We were above that. So when that policy kicked into effect in fiscal year 2025, the general reserves were used to offset some of them and reduce the member agency contributions. We also had the set aside of $125,000, which was our cost estimate, and sort of an initial set aside for the periodic evaluation. And the point of creating that reserve was in part to try to prevent year-to-year spikes in member agency contributions for these expenses that we knew were going to be incurred. what you will see as I scroll back up to the revised and projected budget for the current year is, we have increased, what we're recommending for the, GSP periodic evaluation set aside. And that is, as Rob alluded to, the Mid-County Groundwater Agency, our adjacent, basin did go through their 5-year process. They did not do an amendment to the plan, but they went through the periodic evaluation. And their costs were about that amount, 175. As Rob alluded to, and we'll see how the work unfolds, but we think it's more likely in this basin that there may be a plan amendment, re-examining some of the sustainable management criteria, sort of for the reasons that Rob described. And so that's in part why you see the increase there. You're also gonna see when we get to operating expenses, that expenses to date have been less than anticipated. One of those costs is that funding mechanisms evaluation, that 25,000 that was approved for use in 2025, that work has not started yet. We know there is interest in doing that work, so we're taking that 25,000 and recommending that go into a designated reserve and would be used next year. So as I work my way down, you're not gonna see any difference between the 2025 approved and the revised and projected in terms of the agency contribution. So those columns 2 and 3 there, the amounts are gonna be the same. What you will see is what I just alluded to, which is that when you look at the bottom line on total operating expenses, the expenses to date for the year are less than projected. That's in part driven by the administrative coordination task. You can see that's coming in less than anticipated. That task actually includes more than just administration. As you know, the Regional Water Management Foundation, myself, Rob, Sophia, provide both the administrative support to the agency, but also Rob's time on supporting on the Sigma planning and the GSP implementation. That, and this goes back several years, has been captured under that administrative coordination task. So you're seeing that work as a whole come in, under budget thus far. Treasurer services, and I should mention that for that third column, the revised and projected, those are based upon actual costs incurred July 1 through December 31st, and then our best estimate of what we think the costs are gonna be for the rest of the year. So it may be that when we come back in May with the proposed budget for next year, these are our best estimates at the moment, but there could be some variability there. We're projecting things like the treasurer services, that's the amount that Scotts Valley Water District receives for the work by the financial staff and by the treasurer. As you know, Scotts Valley is in the treasurer role. And then we're into the professional contract services, legal services thus far have been less than budgeted. We are preserving some funds there in outreach, although it looks like that's coming in slightly under budget. As noted in the footnotes there, the audit services, there was a partial credit from a payment that hit in the last fiscal year, so that's why you're seeing that 4,500 to date. In the end, we expect that the annual audit is about 8,000 or so per year. That amount will be fully expended. And then we're into technical services, and so I'm actually gonna jump over to the packet because there's a breakout there on page 164 that shows those in detail, and I think it's gonna be useful for this discussion. So give me just a second. Well, that didn't match. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay. So again, this on the budget table, we were just looking at, right, technical services is condensed into a single line. Here you can see the actual budget, and where we're projected. And then what we're looking at for next year, which I'm gonna come back to when we're looking at the larger table. Annual report is about where we expected, in terms of budget. The professional services and monitoring equipment, it looks like, again, this is one that's subject to change. If something out in the field breaks, that amount could increase. But at the moment, you know, we're estimating 8,000 for the year. The biggest cost savings is, on the funding mechanisms evaluation. So again, it's that work that we think is critical, and you're seeing projected on the preliminary budget for next year. But that work is not gonna happen this year. So I'm gonna jump back to the other table. And you'll see the ending reserves. So this is the difference. Again, column 2 is showing what was proposed and what was approved for this fiscal year and sort of where we are now. Because operating expenses are less than anticipated at the year, you're gonna see some of that credited towards the general reserve, but also there's sufficient funds that allow us to you know, hit those set asides for both the 5-year periodic evaluation as well as the 25,000 for the funding mechanisms evaluation. So scrolling back up to the top, when we're looking at next year, you're gonna see those same amounts, those placeholders, right, as our beginning reserves. We have the estimated contributions from the member agencies. And we'll come back in part to sort of how those are determined as well, because it ties into that reserve policy and ensuring that we're hitting that 20% reserve target. So we're in part back calculating out to what we think those are gonna be. In terms of the administrative expenses, that column, the 2 columns on the far right it's showing the difference in terms of dollars and percentage between the approved budget and the proposed budget. So it's not the actuals. We're opting to use the approved budget in that category, and it's really in part for you know, initial comparison purposes. So it's less, we're anticipating a slightly lower administrative cost compared to the budgeted amount, but again, it's higher than what we're estimating we're gonna come in at for the current year. That in part is because we are making a conservative estimate in terms of the overall level of effort. We do know that as the periodic evaluation gets underway, there's going to be an increase in staff time on that. So in terms of the professional contract services, again, you're gonna see the jump here, and the jump is principally in that technical services category, and it is principally because you see that 90,000 that's estimated to be used on the periodic evaluation for next year. And so I'm gonna jump back over to the other table clips so you can see in detail what we're looking at for next year. So this is the start of that work on the periodic evaluation. Slight increase on the annual report estimate. We're holding monitoring equipment constant, as well as the data management system, as well as stream monitoring, and then the 25,000 that I mentioned before about the funding mechanisms evaluation. So in total, we've got operating expenses at 576,000. Again, that general reserves, this 115,200 here, that's 20% of that operating expense. So we are keeping the 85,000 in the periodic reserve designation, because that's going to be used the following year. So we're starting with the 175K, we're estimating 90,000 is used next year. That leaves 85,000 for the remaining year. And then it is due in, the report's due in January of 2027. So, Let me see if I had any other notes. I think that captures most of it. I did want to mention, this is just a slight change, but a factor in here. Rob mentioned the contribution towards the small GSA's coalition. It was not a great place in here, where we saw it aligning with our existing budget categories. General administrative does include membership fees, so to Aqua, JPIA, which is related to the insurance, and so it seemed like that was as good a fit as any. So you are seeing that jump from 11,000 in the current year's projected to 13,750. That's specifically for that initial estimate on the costs related to the small GSA's coalition. I know we had a written question from Director Angford that was asking about in fiscal year 27, if the agency was going to be required to submit both a periodic evaluation and an annual report, and the answer is yes. Agency does need to do both. So the 5-year evaluation goes in January 30th, and then the annual report goes in April 1st. And who knows if someday that will be a recommendation from the small GSA coalition.
I'm sure Rob and Sierra can work that out.
We're on it.
And then I know there was also a question about whether or not the administrative cost estimates, given the difference between the budget and the actual was again based on conservative estimates of potential work, and the answer is yes, those are, and by conservative, I mean, we're putting a number in there that if additional work is required by staff, there's room in there to accommodate it, so. I think that, so going back to the last part would just be those member agency contributions again, and at this point, those are placeholders at this point. I think we'll come back in May with a more potentially refined budget and see if there's any changes there, but that is what the preliminary budget is looking like at this point.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Input, that we're just receiving information. Any input for staff? Okay, seeing none, is there any input from the public? Here or online?
Not seeing any hands go up in the room, and I'm not seeing any hands go up online.
Okay, thank you very much. That was great. Information received. Okay, so the 4.3 is the agreement for planning administrative services, data management system.
This one's me?
Yeah.
All right, hello to the new board members. I'm Sierra Ryan. I'm with the County of Santa Cruz and on the executive staff, which is made up of myself and Dave McNair from Scotts Valley Water District and John Kunkel from San Lorenzo Valley Water District, which is here right now. Because we refer to the executive team in here, and it's like, you're not gonna know what we're talking about, so. I'm gonna give a little more background, given that we have so many new people at the table, because this is referring to some work that was done a while ago and a precedent that we set in place that we want to continue. So back in 2020, as a requirement of SMGWA compliance, we developed a data management system. We actually did this jointly with our neighbors, the Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Agency, to build some economy of scale, since they had the same requirements we did on the time frame. That was a competitive process at the time. We ended up going with a firm called Kisters. They're a multinational organization. They do a lot with water data, and some of our local water districts use them. So there was some kind of opportunity, some advantage there. They developed our data management system. It's a joint data management system between the two. You saw some of the hydrographs from it that Rob was showing earlier. So we have, after they were selected and they developed the data management system, we then entered into a 3-year agreement with them for ongoing hosting and maintenance, and then helping us deal with some issues that we've had. It's been an okay, I would say, outcome. The data management system is really complicated and we struggled a little to get it to do what we wanted to, but at this point, it's actually running really nicely. It's a great place you can go to, and I realize I should have put the link in the packet, but you can find all of our data in there. It creates hydrographs just when you scroll over. So at this point, I'd say it's going pretty well with them. Moving on to administrative and planning services, in 2022, we again partnered with the Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Agency to try to solve some challenges that we've had from a staffing perspective. The agency itself doesn't have any staff. Through the development of the GSP, we were using what's called a collaborative staffing model, where staff from the member agencies would contribute time towards this effort. And then we had a lot of consultants that were doing a lot of the heavy lifting. That model was really challenging, given that all the agency staff also have full-time jobs at the agencies. And it did feel like we weren't doing justice to the groundwater sustainability agency and being able to focus our time and attention on moving things forward. Again, this was a challenge in the Mid-County Basin as well. And so we collaborated with them in 2022. There was a subcommittee from this board and a subcommittee from that board that got together, and we did a competitive process to try to find a firm who could support us with administration and planning support. The Regional Water Management Foundation was selected. The 3 people sitting here have contributed immensely to this basin over the last 3 years. From the staff level, we've been really happy with the support that we've received and the work that they've done. So leading up to now, these were both 3-year contracts. They are contracted with the County of Santa Cruz because we are member agencies of both the Santa Margarita and the Santa Cruz Mid-County. We're the only member agency of both. So it made sense for us to hold the contracts because they were joint contracts between the 2 basins. And then we have revenue agreements for reimbursement from this agency. So the Regional Water Management Foundation and Kister send us the invoices, we process them, and then we turn around and invoice the groundwater agency for those costs. So again, they were 3-year contracts that are expiring on June 30th for both of them. We requested updated cost amounts to potentially extend these contracts for a further 2-year period. Under the county's purchasing policies, we can have up to 5 years in any contract before we have to go out to bid. So we've done 3 years. We can renew these for another two years. At which point we will have to do an open recruitment again if we're going to continue using this model. So in the packet, you'll see the bids that we received from the cost estimates from both Kister's and from the Regional Water Management Foundation. The costs are very consistent with what we've seen over the last few years. There was no dramatic increase in the rates that they're going to be charging us or their estimates. I don't even think it's fully CPI that's been increased by. So the executive team reviewed all of these. We recommend that we move forward with renewing these contracts for a further 2 years. So the action this body would take is basically to tell us to renew the contract or the revenue agreement between the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency and the county, because the county is the one that actually holds the contract with the contractors here. So I know it's a little confusing, but we've made it work and I think it's worked really, really well over the last couple of years. We anticipate Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Agency will also adopt the same approach that we take here. We are also recommending to that agency the same thing. So assuming that both agencies are in support, we will continue this model for the next 2 years. And I should say that you already reviewed the draft budget. We did go ahead and put the numbers in the draft budget because we didn't anticipate there being a lot of objections. Were there to be objections, we would have to start an entire process to recruit new people or a new firm, or at least open it up again to a competitive process, which would likely take us beyond the July 1st start date. So there would be a little bit of a challenge there, but it is an option for you as well. Are there any questions, comments?
Just curious, I know that the, you know, the providing of the services themselves don't include like self-analysis of the economies of scale benefits that we're seeing, but has anyone conjectured any sort of idea of what those numbers are?
Are you saying whether if we tried to do it ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know because we were doing it ourselves at a different time when there were different jobs to do, so.
Right, no, we haven't done that analysis, but I think that for us, the main point of the benefit of the economies of scale partnering with Mid-County was to be able to offer full-time positions to people who otherwise might not be interested in taking a half-time job. So Rob's position, for example, we wouldn't have been able through this agency to provide a full-time job for him. And so he probably wouldn't have quit his other job that he had to come for us half-time.
Okay.
So does that sort of get to?
And I would say it was not gonna be sustainable, like Perrette Harmon was
Yeah.
sort of a machine. I mean, she was, I don't know how many, her day had like 27 hours in it. And that's just not gonna be repeatable, or, you know, you can't expect staff to do that. She was just sort of, you know, and it was always a moving, you know, it was never intended to be permanent. So she was willing to do that heavy lifting, and it saved a bunch of money since she couldn't figure out a way to really charge us.
Yeah.
So it just sort of got wrapped into her salary, and that was very unrealistic to, you know, expect that to go on, but it was
And I
a great benefit at the time.
I should say that we did end up leaning more heavily on Montgomery and Associates because
That's true.
they ended up, you know, they wrote our GSP rather than having, you know, a staff person write it and then having them kind of just do the modeling.
Yeah.
So they are very expensive, so.
I think the economy of scale with having Rob do so much of the planning work
Yeah.
has really.
It's
proven
definitely
out
cut
to
back
be-
on our need for the consultants.
Yes.
I would suggest, and this is not any issue with it at all, in fact, it's, you know, pleasant to suggest that I don't think economies of scale is an accurate description of the benefit. I think the benefit is quality of dedicated, you know, we're getting a much higher quality product than a similar size basin that's not able to do this is getting, so.
Well said.
Couple quick questions.
Yes, wait.
Was, under the original contract, was that split 50-50 approximately? It says approximately in here, so.
Yeah, so it's actually, they charge for services rendered, so it's based on time.
Okay.
So all of our actual invoices that we receive are based on time, which is partly why they come in under budget, because they have been spending, particularly this last year with Mid-County needing more attention, given that they had their evaluation, their periodic evaluation. The actual amount that this basin was charged was less than budgeted. I think that we're gonna see a little flip in that, but these again are very conservative estimates, so it's almost like if we know that they're probably going to come in under budget altogether.
The other question is assuming this board authorizes to go forward for the next 2 years, and then the county has to go to a new RFP. Is there language in the contract of getting the data out of their system? Migrating it from go to vendor B, so vendor A doesn't win the RFP in 2 years for the county. Is there language in the contract that
In
says
the Kisters contract,
the renewal contract that
Yeah.
we would be, you know, moving forward, the county would be authorizing it? Because that's the biggest part of moving from one vendor to the other
Right.
out in the cloud is how do you get your data out? What format is the data? Is it useful? Is that data now? They're just gonna give you a hard disk and say, here you go, figure out what to do with it. I just wanna make sure that there's some language in there, and I'm sure the lawyers are smart and know
yeah,
this,
the
but that's.
lawyers review everything. I can't tell you off the top of my head what the language is. We do own the data, so they would have to give us,
Yeah.
but it might be that we get spreadsheets. Excel spreadsheets, that's probably what we would actually get, and then we could find another vendor who wants to put them into a different
Got it.
system, but.
That's the biggest challenge of moving from one thing to another, so.
Yeah,
Okay, anyone else? Yes.
I think you addressed the Sierra, but I'm reading Doug's comments here. So it sounds like whatever with Kisters that was challenging at the beginning is kind of stabilized, and your recommendation is to move forward for these 2 years, but likely with a renewal, you'd go out to RFP and
We'll have to go.
possibly, yeah, you will have to, but possibly look for another vendor. And
Yes, we will definitely be open to other vendors when that time comes, but at this particular moment, I think that they're serving us well for how much we are paying, because going out to a new vendor means building a new system, which is going to be more expensive than just paying to maintain the one that we have that is now working pretty well.
Okay, anything from the public here? And not seeing any hands, anything from the public online?
Not seeing any hands go up online.
Okay.
Still have a few people on, but.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve and authorize the Scotts Valley Water District General Manager execute an agreement with the County of Santa Cruz Administrative for Planning Services and Data Management Systems, hosting and maintenance, and the amount not to exceed $546,408 for fiscal years 26 and 27? Okay. Second,
Second,
okay, thank you. All right, let's see. You got that? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none opposed?
I'd like to, I'll
Yes.
just
Go
abstain.
ahead, Brian. Sorry, welcome.
Because I didn't hear the whole discussion.
Yes, you can abstain. Okay, one abstention. Thank you. Glad you made it.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have 4.4 treasurer and auditor appointments.
Okay, so, the current treasurer, Nick Kearns, is departing from Scotts Valley, Water District. Tomorrow, I believe is his last day, and so as noted in the packet, and I was.
Today's his
last day.
He's halfway out in his mind.
His car is running.
I was remiss in the budget part of not thanking Nick for his support on the budget preparation, so, thank you, Nick, for your support on that, and, I will say, I'm sorry to see you go, and per the bylaws as, laid out in the packet, it stipulates that the treasurer, and the auditor, are to be from the same member agency. And so with the change in staffing, we're gonna go through the, it's proposed to go through the reappointment process. The district, does have another staff member, John Dillon, who can serve as the, interim treasurer for the agency, and then I think that that role for the district will be assessed over time. But the benefit of the board taking action this evening is we will have someone in place to have the checks and make sure that the payments and all of the related financial responsibilities are carrying on. So I can pull up the recommended action, or if there's any other specific questions, or if either, I'm not sure if, David, if that fully covered it, or if there's anything else you want to add, but, otherwise we can pack it.
Okay, yes,
Is the recommendation to appoint Mr. Dillon as the interim finance, or he is going to be the interim finance manager for the Scotts Valley Water District? Is he going to be the interim treasurer for this agency as well? Or is he going to be a permanent appointment as the treasurer until such a time that?
Yes, thank you for clarifying. He is being appointed as the treasurer. His job title, as I understand it, at the district is interim finance manager and customer service.
So it's not also the interim treasurer of this agency.
No, he will be designated as the treasurer, and then if there needs to be a change in the future, it would come back to the board in the future.
Thank you.
and Dave McNair is the auditor.
Correct. David McNair is the auditor. I know the term is not to be confused with the independent audit that will still happen with the outside.
Right. Okay. Any questions about that? Circuitous? Pretty straightforward. Anything from the public here? Seeing none, anyone online wanna?
I'm gonna double check online. Sorry, there's a little bit of lag with the Zoom here. I'm not seeing any hands go up online.
Okay, then I guess I need a motion to appoint John Dillon, interim finance, customer service manager, Scotts Valley Water District as treasurer, Dave McNair, general manager, Scotts Valley Water District as auditor of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency effective February 28th, 2025. Do I have a motion?
So motion.
Okay, do I have a second? Second, okay. Leishman and Koenig, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, none, unanimous. Okay, 4.5 board vacancy, well owner, alternate representative.
Okay, I'm gonna take this one as well, and, as you know, at this point, we did have a resignation from the prior well owner director Koopman. And, per the bylaws, alternate director Hutchison, accepted, the shift in roles there from alternate director to director, and so, we are grateful for her doing so, and under the bylaws, she will fill out the remaining term of the outgoing director, so I think you're about halfway, Director Goodman was about halfway through his term. And the bylaws also, lay out the process by which vacancies are to be filled. And so there is a vacancy, of course, now for the alternate director. The board packet included both the bylaws and then a prior summary, an overview of the process that was in place from the last solicitation several years back. And it's a fairly involved process if you had a chance to look at it. So I made a few slides here to just talk through what that looks like. I'm gonna share my screen, just so folks can see online and photo recording. Okay, so the first part of this again is establishing the qualification. So as defined in there, directors must be an owner of a private well, or a tenant leasing property with a private well, or a representative from a small water system with a well. And it's slightly longer when written in the bylaws, because after each of those eligible types, it makes it clear that the well must be located within the agency's boundaries. Individuals have to be 18 years or older, and then for criteria C there, exhibit high standards of integrity, commitment, and good judgment. So those are the qualifications. In terms of laying out the process, this is what the bylaws lays out there. The board shall appoint a temporary or ad hoc committee of 3 directors to facilitate the appointment. There needs to be at least 1 member director. And then there's a preference for the then serving well owners to fill the remaining 2 positions. So that would be Director Cassidy and Director Hutchison as our current then serving owners. That committee will ensure that there's public notice of the opportunity to apply, establish the selection criteria and the deadlines and the timeline for decision-making on appointees. There is a prior application from earlier solicitations. I think the committee can take a look at that application and see if it needs any revision or if it's good as is. And then the process itself is interesting in that, as I think you know, there is this option for applicants to do a self-selection. And the way it's laid out is that if there are more applicants than the number of vacancies, the applicants can get together and self-nominate a well owner. And so the process is that they essentially, if they come to agreement and, elect to nominate a single individual, then the other applicants can voluntarily withdraw their applications. And there's more specificity in the bylaws about that process and who they have to notify, but that's essentially how the self-selection works. It does specify a time frame in there, so there's 20 to 40 days after applications have come in. The pool of applicants will all be notified. And then it is up to the committee and the applicants to organize a meeting and confer and see how they want that process to roll out. If they do not self-select a nominee, say there's more than one applicant, they don't come to agreement, then the board has the option to appoint any of the qualified applicants. If the position remains vacant after the conclusion of the process, the board may appoint any person meeting those requirements, so more open-ended option there. And then regardless of which pathway they come before the board, the final appointment any person filling that well under vacancy does require board approval, and it requires unanimous approval of the 3 member agencies. So Scotts Valley Water District, San Lorenzo Valley Water District, and the county. So that's the overall process itself. And questions?
Any discussion? Any thoughts?
Happy to serve on the committee.
Okay. Anyone want to serve with these mighty people?
So I guess I'm assuming that I was gonna.
Yes, and then one board member. Need to do it?
Chair Perry.
Okay, I'll do it. Okay. So then I guess we'll set off on the process. Okay.
Public comment?
Excuse me?
Public comment? Not seeing any hands in the room, not seeing any hands online.
So we're just acknowledging, right? We're not taking a vote, are we?
Well, I think that's a good question. I know the nominations themselves, I want to make sure that, I think the board still needs to take action to approve the nominations, the committee nominations, that is.
Okay.
But I'll look at Terry. for
Yeah,
some of
the acknowledgement was Kara. And so we're acknowledging that you are now the well-honored representative. The second part is the board tonight needs to form a temporary committee to begin the solicitation process. So there is an action item.
All right, so,
I move that we form a temporary committee of myself, Cara, and you.
okay,
I'll second.
okay, great, thank you, Ray. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, anyone opposed? No. Okay, great. K5, we have the annual election of officers. Tim, do you wanna?
Yes, okay, so this is at the first meeting of the calendar year, the officers are elected, so that includes the chair, the vice chair, and secretary. We currently have Chair Perry from Scotts Valley Water District in that position. Director Smalley from San Lorenzo Valley Water District was the vice chair. He's now an alternate to this board. And Director Cassidy is the current secretary. So under this process, nominations can be made for each of those positions. As noted in the packet, officers can succeed themselves and serve consecutive or non-consecutive terms. And if 2 or more directors are nominated for any of those positions, voting occurs until the nominee has a majority of votes. So, at this time, the floor is open for nominations for any of those positions. Shall we start with chair?
Okay, we have a nomination for chair.
I would nominate, Harry
Okay.
to do it again. Now that I found out he's pretty much retired.
Don't tell me.
I will second the nomination of Chair Perry to continue.
Okay. Have any other nominations? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, it's unanimous. Okay, so we need a nomination for vice chair. I would nominate Brian Largay to be the vice chair.
I'll second that.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? None? Great. And secretary. Who wants to jump into the breach? Now, Eden, the workload is pretty heavy for secretary. Do you want to scare someone off?
Inundating. A lot of docu-signs.
Yeah, a lot of docu-signs, but that's about it, right?
So far, yeah.
Okay. Do I hear any nominations for secretary? Anyone want to say, boy, I'd love to be secretary?
Happy to do it again.
I nominate.
Doesn't seem real popular.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, all right, well done.
Chair Perry, I'm sorry, who was the second on that motion?
That was, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, staff reports. Financial report? Has everyone had a chance to look at that, Nick?
Just a couple of notes because we had a question come in on variances, page 180. Lieutenant mentioned it in the budget presentation that the administrative staff and the estimated actuals column does look to be trending low, so that budget variance. Let's display to the table our actual cost cumulative, so July through December, and then 50% of the budget. So we do anticipate that category coming in under. And also during the budget, you mentioned about the audit services, the timing on essentially a credit, so 3,500 spent year to date should be the year's total. And I believe there's one other column, technical services 52,500. There's a question on that. That category is trending under, but I think into January, and I think in the coming months, we're going to see greater invoices, so I begin to work in the budget on estimated actual for the year, but we'll coming close to the budget on that.
Okay,
Other than that, I didn't have anything to add to the report.
okay, is there any, anything from the board? Anything from anyone here in the public? Anything from anyone online?
Not seeing any hands go up online.
Okay. Then we have thank you, Nick, for the last time, really appreciate it, all your hard work, really has been great. Santa Margarita Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan Implementation Activities Status Report. Anything to add?
Just a quick note for the new board members. The groundwater sustainability plan has a section that describes how are you going to implement your plan, and it lays out a process. The intent of this table is to track activities consistent with that chapter. So it's in addition to what you get at the beginning, we talked about some of the highlights of the program. It's always a standing item in there. The intent is to sort of keep it on the water/calendar year, kind of refreshing it as necessary, only keeping some of the historical information that might be necessary, like talking about funding structure, things like that, that has a historical component to it.
Any input questions? Public? I don't think this kind of a standing item. Okay, we have the 700, Form 700, the famous legendary Form 700. We still have some need to files. Does anyone from staff wanna, because it was kind of confusing this year with.
It was, yeah, and so there was a change, as you all know by now, from multiple emails in the way that the Fair Political Practice Commission does its annual filings, and so. The table that was in the packet, I know is slightly out of date. Sophia's received some updates since this went in the packet, so. Some of you might be seeing things on here where you know you've sent it to her. You know, between when the packet went out and now we have updated it. This is just a reminder in terms of what those filing deadlines are. We also understand that for some subcategories, for example, county supervisors, the date may be earlier. And you're filing on behalf of your other agencies. I think I would best summarize it by saying, if you still have any questions at this point, Sophia has invested a lot of time in trying to understand the process and making sure we're on the same page with the county, so don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're uncertain about your status.
Okay, and I'm just gonna add something. I'm gonna ask Terry if you know about this, something I heard at our finance meeting, subcommittee meeting, about new law regarding attending meetings by Zoom. You can only do it twice a year. Is that what it was, Dave?
I don't think that passed.
Oh, it did?
I'm not.
No, it did. It
went into effect
January
January 1st. Okay.
And if I read it correctly.
Isn't that the one where the emergency, that was the one statute, which is the one that we don't use very much?
There's a updated portion that I think now has more specificity based upon the number of meetings that an agency typically holds per year. There's a threshold now on the percentage of those meetings that directors are able to attend in person versus remotely, so.
Look, Terry, you give us some clarification.
Exactly, and I thought that was the newer statute that applied, and I'll research it, sorry guys, but I thought it was the new statute that applied to if you called in the night before with your child sick or whatever. That was where I thought that section was, but I will check.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have we got a special recognition from JPIA, that's our insurance company. You like that plaque? We get that thing framed.
Is there a dividend check with it or?
No, we have gotten dividend checks from them, and they bring a giant check.
Yeah.
They give it back. No, we didn't give them. Events calendar, and this is something that Tim told me about. What's coming up that would be a virtual sort of educational opportunity for us?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up the slide right here. This looks like a great opportunity for those who have the time to do this. This is sponsored by the UC's, it's got the UC Davis logo on here. I believe it's through the Ag Extension Program, where they are gonna do a short course, online course on just that introduction to watersheds and groundwater sustainability plans. And so within here, they list out the dates. I believe it's 5 different dates. Well, it's in the packet as well, but there's a link in there. So if you are interested in attending, there is money in this year's budget for conferences and workshops. It's a quite reasonable price. It's actually, it's not even $100, it's $70 for board directors and alternates. And so you can see there's 5 dates there in April and May. I know the sessions are going to be recorded as well, but I think there's a live Q&A, if you're attending real time. So if you are interested in that opportunity, please send us an email. I think ideally we would make a one-time payment of agency funds, so you're not having to pay individually and then submit a reimbursement. It would be better for us to get a list of people who are interested, and so send an email to admin@, or just let us know this evening after the meeting, and we'll keep track of that.
Okay, and we are members of the Association of California Water Agencies, and we get our insurance through that membership. And they are having their spring conference down in Monterey this year, so it's local. I don't think this agency pays for that, to go to that, because it's a little expensive, so it'd be the member agencies would pay. I'm going for Scotts Valley this year. We tend to go a lot. It's worthwhile, lots of great educational opportunities available, so that's kind of up to everyone's member agency to do or not do. And not hearing anything else. Oh, director's reports, sorry. Did any director have a report about anything water wise that, or something that'd be relevant to us? Okay, not hearing anything. That brings us to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Cassidy? Okay, I think we're all in favor? Aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.